first of all, I very much appreciate that you arrange this opportunity. Now, in the past, as a result of dialogue or discuss with scientists, it became quite clear in the scientific field, cosmology, neurobiology, physics, subatomic physics, and then psychology. You see, these four fields seems to be very much involved in the Buddhist, Buddhist thought or Buddhist philosophy. I want to, although I don't know what kind of audience here, even I can't see your face also, very difficult. So in any way, I thought this may be useful, you see, to explain these four fields, how, you see, relevant, connected with the Buddhist, the Buddhist teaching. Now, you see, briefly, you know, the basic Buddhist teaching is, or the foundation of Buddhism is Four Noble Truths, that everybody knows. Now, the Four Noble Truths, actually, you see, the idea of Four Noble Truths, or the system of and the Four Noble Truths, you see, comes on the basis of the law of causality. So things momentarily changing, there must be its causes and conditions. Without that, it cannot come. So you see, now the Four Noble Truths, true suffering, the causes of the suffering, and this is the cessation of the suffering, and the way or method is to overcome these suffering. This is the four idea. Now, I think, you see, I think it is important to explain the scientific way of thinking is something very important role in Buddhism. I think this may be useful to explain. Now, the Four Noble Truths, you see, on the basis of causality, law of causality. So it's a further explanation. The main further explanation is the connection, causes and result. Now here the Buddha explained more detail the kasatendina juni.
He explained this law of causality in a detailed way when he presented the dwellings of interdependent origination. Both in their systematic order and also in the reverse form.
Then so you see, through that way, it becomes clear the ultimate source of suffering is ignorance. Now, how to overcome ignorance? Not through prayer, not through just a devotion or offering, but through development of correct view. The
proper method of removing ignorance is through cultivating the right conceptual thought, kind of wisdom, which will act as a counterforce to ignorance. This wisdom, which acts as the direct counterforce for removing the ignorance, is in fact explained in the three Buddhist trainings: the training on morality, material stabilization, and cultivation of wisdom.
So morality as a basis. the one-pointness samadhi is something like the instrument. The real sort of weapon to hit on ignorance is the wisdom. So is that wisdom through Tösam Komsung Tan Yonga.
And such kind of wisdom which acts as a counterforce in removing the ignorance has to be cultivated step by step through hearing, through thinking, and through meditation.
Now here, you see, it becomes quite clear the wisdom, which is something kasoda kada term nesu chimashi shapes kuwa.
Wisdom, when we say wisdom, it means a kind of wisdom which understands the law of nature or the reality as it is.
term naturally mabachi namdo dodan chibayina demandipche. Term naturally yebachi mabar dana ya mandipche. That term naturally chidri yeba tagana shinchi that shape logic gudwa.
When we talk about the cultivation of wisdom, it becomes quite important because normally either due to unnecessary misconceptual thought, we tend to exaggerate certain things and fall into the extreme of eternalism, or we tend to refute everything and fall into the extreme of nihilism. So in order to remove these two extremes, it's extremely important to cultivate the wisdom which understands the nature of the law of reality as it is.
So the reason you do that, kasobe, moyu nesu tana paya sari shish kashim.
It is from this point of view, establishing and understanding the reality or law of nature as it is becomes a crucial point.
So therefore, the Buddha, therefore, now even within Buddha's own teaching, because of under particular circumstances, you see, sometimes Buddha taught a certain hasidic, a certain teaching which
sometimes in order to lead different disciples or followers with different mental dispositions, Buddha in fact adopted different techniques of teaching, and some of the teaching you cannot take it from the literal point of view, and in fact does not conform to the reality.
So therefore, now you see Buddha stated, my follower should not accept my word out of faith, but rather through investigation, you see, through experiment. So this, this creates sort of the liberty to examine Buddha's own word. So therefore, that
it is from this point of view, the Buddha's teaching, which is known as the four reliances, becomes quite important, quite crucial.
The
four reliances, in fact, means it is more important to rely and examine the authority of the teaching rather than on the teacher or the person who teaches that subject. And with respect to the teaching also, it is important to take heed of the meaning rather than the beauty of the word. And with respect to the meaning also, you should take more importance to the ultimate meaning rather than the conventional or interpretative meaning. And with respect to realization of that ultimate meaning also, it is important to rely on the wisdom understanding suchness rather than the conventional mind understanding.
So therefore, you see, in the Buddhism in general, and particularly in the Bodhisattva or Mahayana teaching, it is extremely important, you see, to use reasons rather than just, you see, accept as Buddha's own word. And in fact, the genuine the
specific choosing sort of disciples or followers.
가서 원을 취지잖아. the number on the chain, the one 취지잖아. the 남산 캐멜링에 균제 딱제제니 균제 마통보도 캐멜링에 드리지 있다 두시디 치르주셨어요.
Specific followers of Buddha's teaching here refers to those followers with sharp mental faculties. Those with sharp mental faculty here means those who would not accept Buddha's teaching because it is simply taught by Buddha, who is their teacher, but they would examine using their logical reasoning about the authenticity of the teaching of Buddha. And it is only after finding the authenticity of their teaching they would accept it.
So this gives us some kind of the liberty to examine. So the genuine scientist has the attitude. You see, very, I think, the unbiased, very unbiased, very neutral, you see, mind. And then you see, carry the experiment. Through experiment, you see, through investigation, when things really become obvious, then you accept. Until you see that situation you see develop, you see, you cannot consider.
You can take it for granted.
So now here, you see the scientific the way of in examining, and you see Buddhist, I think the general sort of approach. You see there, I feel you see a similar sort of pattern or similar way. Now you see the when you see about the Four Noble Truths, the first is the true suffering, right? True suffering. Now there, although you see the main subject is the different kind of suffering. Suffering, when you see they explain that suffering, or they, in order to know you see more thoroughly, the three realms also is involved. With that cosmology idea, now you see and obviously you see like you see the Abhidhamma-kosha. You see the Buddhists, you see, according that you see text, you see, the world is you see flat, and you see Mount Miruta, these things. So now these things, you see, according modern science, now it is clear. You see, the world is round. You see, this we can see, we can measure. So therefore, you see, we have the liberty to reject, you see, that because of that presentation. Because you see here now the reason actually our because of direct experience. So you see, but generally again now so world how to form, you see how to disappear. Now the Buddhist explanation mainly due to 5 elements. So this the modern science also you see now here you see the empty space and then some kind of subtle energy. Usually we call air, but you see some kind of subtle energy. With that, you see the heat develop. With that, some form of liquid you see come. Through that way, eventually you see solid things you see happen. So again, you see the way of the disappearances also you see first the solid disappear, eventually into the space. Go like that. So that I think is the cosmology explanation. Now here, and you see, limitless sort of the world. These are quite consider, quite similar, quite yes. Then the second noble truth, the causes of true
origin of suffering.
Now here you see the karma or theory of karma or action. Action, I think those action which the chawa tidu dan debu kasore begin jiya ge never you think chawa laba ina phaji kunu deyung yare.
When we use the term karma or action, particularly in the context of relating it to the human experience of happiness and suffering,
human mata
experience of the
pains and
sufferings,
pains and pleasure,
sentient beings, and then it is very much related to the motivation of
so there, now psychology, naturally, now you see involved there, and also you see yes, and then also is the fourth noble truth, the remedy to how to overcome ignorance or these, the negative mental, negative emotion, the positive through positive emotion, you see you can. Reduce, you can remove these things. So you see, in these two fields, the modern psychology, I think you see, particularly in the field of the negative emotion, this is modern psychology. Now it's connected with here, and also the connection brain and mind. That also is the neurobiology, also is connected with this. Now the third Four Noble Truth, about the true cessation. Now here cessation means there are a lot of different interpretation, but the more profound, more subtle, now you see this third Noble Truth is connected with the idea of the emptiness. So now here the modern physics, particularly quantum theory, now very much some ways related with this. So that's how to connect it. So that's my explanation about how to see. So you see, this is not just my personal sort of interest. I mean, this idea or this interest has come due to my own sort of personal thing. No, as a whole, as a Buddhist structure. You see, if you properly think, then that kind of approach automatically come.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be with you here, Your Holiness. When I was asked to come, I was told that I should represent the Western views. But you are a man of many parts, you could represent them yourself. So I'm here only as a supporting actor to encourage that. And I would really like to get your reactions to the Western views, because there's not one Western views of mind, suffering, and healing. I think that is our agenda. As I said, there are no Western views of the mind. There are many views of the mind, there are many models of the mind, but there's no one such thing as the mind. There is, however, family resemblance in all the Western views, right from the hardest to the softest. And I think they go back to the period of enlightenment at the end of 18th century, or in the 18th century, the beginning of the modern era. And here I think they say a psychological revolution took place, that the mind was no longer a metaphysical one. It became limited, it became smaller, an island of individual consciousness which projects a lot outside and has a lot of tendency for illusion, that this is what the mind is. And the mind idea which developed was that mind is really...
Tendency, illusion, sorry.
That the mind is really a mirror of nature, which reflects nature to the individual cells, and that it follows its own rules, but it follows very much psychophysical laws. Physics was the dominant science, so it was, one saw mind, then tried to how fast you forget, how fast you remember. So it was very much the measurements of this was started, the approaches to the mind was this kind of, mind was seen really as a speed, flexibility machine, which then of course then changed to the other ones. Freud and Jung came, which saw mind as a submerged one. There's much less conscious, there's a lot of unconscious. And of course today the dominant idea, as Your Holiness said, is the neuroscience model of the mind, that which reduces the mind to really physical processes of the brain. That is the most radical one, that there is no such thing as the mind. It is only neurons, it is the workings of the neurons, it are the combination of chemical, biological processes in the brain. That is the most radical idea. So we have kind of very from the hard to the very soft versions in the Western views. Now, as I said, in the extreme scientific materialism approach to the mind, which is quite distressing to anyone spiritually inclined, but that, as I said, I do not agree with it, but since I'm supposed to represent it, that is at the moment a dominant one. But these are also fashions which change, so one doesn't have to say how long it would stay. But what I want to point to the commonality between even the softest and the hardest. The first is the Western views would say that there's a complete rejection of metaphysics, which you have rejected yourself in the Buddhist one, but there's a lot of Western views, even Western pioneers, who believe that the Eastern approaches were metaphysical and not scientific, not empirical. Let's put the scientific out. So even Jung, who is supposed to be on the soft side, the most, someone who was most sympathetic to the Buddhist Indian thought, even, let me quote him, he wrote once to a correspondent that my conceptions are empirical and not at all speculative. This is to an Indian correspondent. If you understand them from a philosophical standpoint, you go completely astray. The conceptions of Indian philosophy are thoroughly philosophical and have the character of postulates and can therefore only be analogous to my terms but not identical with them. Our psychology tells you the story of modern European man's adventures. Only if you are able to see the relativity, that is the uncertainty of all human postulates, can you experience that state in which modern psychology makes sense. But psychology just makes no sense to you. Nothing of the things I describe comes to life unless you can accompany or sympathize understandingly with beings that are forced to base their life upon facts to be experienced and not transcendental postulates beyond human experience. Again, another one, I know it is a special feature of Indian thought and that consciousness is assumed to have a metaphysical and pre-human existence. As far as my knowledge goes, however, we have no evidence at all in favor of the hypothesis that a pre-human and pre-conscious psyche is conscious to anybody and is therefore consciousness. The Western mind has renounced metaphysical assertions which are per definition not verifiable, if only recently so. India, it seems to me, is still convinced of the possibility of metaphysical assertions. Perhaps she's right, and perhaps she's not. So this, I'm saying, this is one of the commonalities in all Western thoughts of saying that there cannot be a pre-human or separation of mind from brain is somehow very, very difficult, and which is something I think which I would like Your Holiness to say from the Buddhist point. Can consciousness be separated from brain processes? Because this is would be, I think, agreed to all that once you are brain dead, that is all. That is finished, nothing more. The second common thread, I think most of the Western views, Jung, Freud, were wrong in one sense. They felt that the mind, that the Indian Buddhist thoughts is a metaphysical one, which is not true. Because the essence of the modern idea of the mind is internalization, that there is something within which causes suffering, which also can remove suffering, that the suffering does not come from outside, there are no spirits, ghosts, no stars, etc. So the Hindus system have those 5 passions, the Buddhists have the avidyas, plus also grasping attachment, so it is all inside. So that is very much the psychologically modern idea of the mind. I think that they were mistaken in confusing historical for disproof, and you are more scientific if you eat one scientific. To say I know is not to be scientific, but to be dogmatic. And this was very interesting to hear from you, that Buddhism is scientific exactly in the same way. It is waiting for disproof rather than looking for proof. So this was the third ones. These are, I think, the 3 commonalities in the of the various Western approaches to the mind. With all the different approaches, nobody can really today occupy an Archimedean position and judge which is right or wrong. There is no way of doing that, and nobody can judge what is the correct theory of the mind. Then we come to or maybe I should wait now and go to suffering, or would you like to first react to the mind and the common Western ones before we discuss suffering together? I think one doubt which I really want to know from you is one doubt which I really want to know from you is the relationship between consciousness and death, brain functions and consciousness. I think that is something in Buddhism which is a very interesting part of Buddhism, but which has a very difficulty from the modern views of being understood about it.
The mind is the machine. The notice to what means if shady.
Feels that the usage of the term mind itself is a tricky thing. Because it might have different connotations. So what His Holiness is going to present may or may not come within the concept of that word itself.
I think basically, I think you now here I think the some explanation from certain Buddhists, in Tantrayana, you see, they usually use some school of Tantrayana explain about the different level of mind or body. So you see, according that, including you see that idea, then I think you see, in whether you call mind or consciousness, you see, there are different levels and variety. So all the grosser level of mind is in fact something like the product of this body. So long you see the brain function there, you see these kind of mind active. As soon as brain function ceases, this mind will not function. So it's quite clear. You see something like the levels sugup and service.
Something like related to the chemical reactions or functioning of the brain.
But then that sheba kaso because sitting ngol keak that the sitting ngol keak tsai gyujin shen du zane that sitting gyungam shen gyore nangbe.
When we come to the basic nature of the mind, which is clarity and knowing, what is the fundamental and basic cause for that mind, which has this function of clarity and knowing, then in that case, the Buddhist presentation is that it must have another mind, which is a substantial cause, that is not related to physical thing like the brain.
So the more subtle level, then you see the one subtle, whether we can call mind or not, I don't know. Perhaps some kind of, actually, according to our belief, you see, when that subtle mind, you see, occur or experience, then, of course, it's naturally it's an unconscious level. You cannot feel, you cannot see. So you see, the unconscious level, you see, according to Buddhist belief, you see, there are a certain very, very subtle, I don't know, subtle energy or subtle thing. You see, that is that can separate from this body. But still, I mean, frankly speaking, unless you see, through some experience, through meditation, you see, rather it's difficult you see, to prove or to make a clear presentation. So that's the mind level that renews luli chasa tending mading.
So there are these two categories of the mind: the grosser level, dependent on the physical body, and the more subtle level, which is independent from the physical body.
Which is somewhat difficult to imagine without, as you said, experience
yes,
of how can it be disconnected from anything in the. But it is probably the experience of that meditations which.
Now, you see, we believe, you see, those cases, you see, someone who have some experience when they die, that actually now these days also happen. According clinically, you see, they announce you see, death, but the body remain without decaying for say, a few days. Now, for example, it's my own the tutor, Ling Rinpoche, after his death, the next 13 days, his body remained freshly. And I think in early 70, I think early 70, in early 70, another early 70s, another is a practitioner is who whose body remained, I think, 17 days. So this we explain. Our explanation is the body, the grosser level of mind completely ceases. The brain function also ceases. But the body still remains fresh because the subtle mind still in the body. So as soon as the subtle mind is departed from the body, immediately then you see there's some subtle sort of way of control of the body. Then it's no longer there. Then you see some liquid immediately come, and then you see decay within a minute. So that's because
These are the things that we see and find these days even.
So that's about the concept of mind. But mind, the mind itself, although we often repeat the word of mind or rigpa or sim or number shiva, but the zamzal also be sig dita sig deji khwazam gi pet kasurda deji khwazam be shaji so reshadi.
Of course, we repeatedly use different words like mind or awareness or consciousness, but our normal tendency is to just have a very brief glance of it, and nobody takes deeper notice of what consciousness is.
This is, of course, very similar. One uses kind of often interchangeably self, mind, awareness, consciousness, etc. Not in a very precise way.
Of
The
course, when you use the word mind or self, it's a different subject.
No, self. Mind, self.
They are two different.
According to some Buddhist school of thought, there's a certain part of mind we call self. But the other, the Buddhist school of thought, do not agree that the self is something different than the mind, from the mind. But of course, without mind, the self cannot come to exist. But it's a combination of the body and mind. Then you see self, or the being, sentient being, should come.
The self in the Western views is a developmental one, that it develops right from the beginning, and it is very paradoxical. It is private and public at the same time. It develops out of relatedness, but it also is completely isolated from anyone. And you start seeing it in very little children, that they have interactions with their mothers rhythmically. Then they stop the interaction, go into themselves, want the interaction, and it is a very rhythmical one. And that this stays in human beings, not in the same rhythms, but all through life, that you need to withdraw from the world to go into that private self, but also to come back to that public self, that this movement goes on all the time. So the self has, in the Western one, two faces, private, public. It is also always recognizable, but also always in flux. You always remember yourself, but you are aware of it's always changing. So there are all kind of paradoxical ones of what the self is in the Western views.
Also, when you find in this philosophy refuting the self, then in that case the self refers to a kind of independent, self-supporting self, which is completely isolated or independent or unrelated to the psychophysical body. So that kind of self is being refuted.
suffering? Because Buddhist is the, I mean, that is the...
Suffering is suffering. I think from as I mentioned earlier, the Buddhists explained different kind of suffering. So, of course, the Tungi Dung Islam.
For example, we use the term like suffering of suffering.
That's we commonly consider as a suffering. That's Buddhist term, suffering of suffering.
So, suffering of suffering is the kind of suffering which we normally understand, we normally relate to.
Here, of course, I think the physical suffering, mental suffering. I don't know.
Well, in most Western views, they would say there is certainly a biological basis also of suffering, that there are biological dispositions to particular kind of syndromes, perhaps certain kind of vulnerabilities, biological disposition to anxiety. Some are people more anxious, that there is a biological predisposition, but not only. That is not the only part of suffering, although that is at the moment a very fashionable one again. I mean, that's why the whole drugs, that is not only in the hardware, but that most of the problems are in the software of the psychological system, that we are imprisoned in distorted ideologies, we are poisoned by negative emotions, irritated and frightened by wrong perceptions, paralyzed by self-defeating habits, that most of the suffering still has that kind of a source. And that,
yes.
And that this happens because of the psychological organization, the psyche, another term, we are now putting mind, self, psyche, which as grows up, which is an interaction between the environment, mostly the interpersonal, the relationships, earliest relationships, later relationships, and the biological predispositions, that there are so many wishes, fears, etc., which cannot be expressed, which have to be put down, repressed, which go to make the unconscious. There are a lot of experiences which are not articulated at all, which are not formulated, which have not come up to consciousness. And all of them is because we want to protect the anxiety. That anxiety is our biggest fear right from the beginning. Anxiety drives us to not towards avidya, towards ignorance. So we could reverse this. You have to see the opposite. You have to see the unfamiliar in the familiar. That means you have to be open yourself to anxiety. Only then you can have knowledge. Only then you can have learning. And that is the most difficult task. And that is in the therapy part, and is also the part of the analyst, how to increase the patient's curiosity about the unknown, and that is why what will make him or her anxious, and yet not raise anxiety that he will completely leave it. So that is the kind of balance which is always done in the therapy, to increase your curiosity about that unknown, about that unconscious, and yet not frighten you too much. And so this is kind of very rough shell of suffering and its healing there. But the healing, there's a very, Western visions are not very hopeful ones. I think this is what I would like to ask you. How much happiness can one get? In the most of the Western visions are that there are afflictions, you cannot avoid them. There are fate, kind of blows of fate, which you cannot avoid. That the most you can do is get some distance from them, reflective distance, but not that you can change them completely. So all you can be is a little depressive rather than anxious. That is the best you can be.
당시 feeling manguch paji biology tane de shejai de tane re.
As you rightly pointed out, that
feeling manguch.
of the feelings that we experience can be explained biologically.
Ta ine anda but the young solo tak dara rotu yana menada. Yeah, the biology the schedules ane biology mare biology mata hasre. Ada same the schedule ada kanzamji bodu 당한주 변의 feelings 제 biology 단지 시스템이 거도와. 다 릭직디 찾아라 때한테 겹투 아이메요.
But it's again an area where still there's a lot of questions, unanswered questions. Because to what extent we will be able to explain this biologically is not very sure.
Our feeling, fear, different kinds of emotion. 다 낭벨럽나 박자서야 돼 직시리.
From the Buddhist viewpoint,
not only Buddhist, I think those school of thought which accept the continuation of life. Then you see the one explanation here, Bhakja.
what we call as the karmic imprints or predispositions.
Even you see within one lifetime, you see in early part of life you experience something, but then eventually without kasota, because of
such experience, there is a kind of predisposition or impression left on the mind.
Here is I want to know is your view. The every thought from the usual way of explanation, you see every thought you see must come due to some change in the brain or nervous you see the system, something you see chemical you see reaction, then you see thought come. So this is to say, and is there in some cases the opposite way, thought first come, then you see due to that thought you see some you see chemical you see change in the body. Do you think that possible or not?
Very much so. Very much so.
Very much so.
Very much so.
Then that thought how come?
Yeah. The view is that the body, because we are talking about body-mind or brain-mind relationships, that they are what is called dialogical, which one sees normally also. If I'm feeling depressed, my shoulders start sagging, there are kind of very gross changes taking place in body, but also subtle in the hormonal, etc., chemical of the brain. And the other way around, if I'm feeling very well, then my body is straight up, there are other changes taking place, and the other way around. If I'm ill, then my mood starts going down. So that is a very kind of a dialogical relationship between the one. So that belief is, if not the dominant, but pretty prevalent. There are some people who believe there is no connection at all, that it is absolutely parallels. But this one, the mutual interaction of brain and mind is a quite agreed one upon. Because this is a part of everyone's experience.
죄송한데 남도시 기회 왕기 룰조 제일 누구야 라저세. 전에는 남도시 기야데 갔던 게 거래.
So this question is, for example, if there is this possibility of experiencing
first
chemical or biological or changes in the brain because of certain conceptual thought, then how would we find the process of such arisal of such conceptual thoughts?
Now, firstly, you see once we accepted the consciousness of mind or thought is product of brain, or is it some you see, due to the physical thing, you see these is a different you see, feeling or different is thought you see come. You see that. So
there is our basic sort.
So every experience of mind, you see, must develop on the basis of something happen in the body. That's the fundamental. So then you see how that thought the thought consume.
In that point of view, how could the changes in the thought can move the changes in the physical body?
This is that thought without any you see. Now, I roughly speaking, of course, art is a daily experience. You see, sometimes, as you mentioned, you see, because of the body physical condition not normal, something wrong. So you see, your thought, you see, more frustration, easily you see develop anger, things like that. Then you see your physical is very healthy, you see, very good, then you see your mood bit was more happy, so like that. But then you see sometimes they, without the slightest, you see, change, or of course obvious change, but subtle change may be there. I don't know. This is I'm seeking. You see, I'm seeking. So sometimes you see, when your mood, you see, I mean everything very pleasant. You see, very calm. Then you see some memory, past memory, you see, happen. Or just, you see, not memory, just you see, some thought, you see, happen, and due to that, then you see some you see, physical, you see, change, you see, come later. So it's such, and grosser level seems, you see, in some cases, because of the physical change, certain mental attitude, you see, comes. Some cases seems, you see, purely, you see, mental level, you see, something happen, then you see physical, you see, change. So if that is the case, then that is a mental, mental element, how develop?
The answer would be through the environmental experience, that there would be one thought, not that I agree with, that it reacts straight on the neurons. There is no thoughts, etc. That experience, even colors, lights, etc. There is a straight interaction going on the neurons in the brain, which then produce the thought or not produce the thoughts, or subtle or a gross one. So that the experience taking in of the world, of whichever way, is producing, changing in the brain neurons, and then either it comes up to the level of thought or doesn't. There's so many thoughts which are not thought at all, which remain unthought. So thought is, we are putting it at the logical ones, which don't have to be with logic and words or anything, but some movements towards thought, so very subtle kind of thought. That would be the answer of one particular school. As I said, not mine only. I'm only representative. So, and that can come to hatred. And the psychological one would be that to be able to hate, but to get over hatred, but not inability to hate, that would be seen as not the right thing. If you are unable to hate, you are not quite okay. And if you can only hate and not get over hating, that's also not quite okay. But to be able to hate and then get over hating, that would be seen as a healthy one. That would be the kind of Western psychological view of hatred and where it comes from.
I think.
That's a kind of feeling of kind of liberation of hatred. Because in a sense it's agreeable. Otherwise you will become a person without feeling.
But how would the Buddhist dealing with hatred, how does one what happens with hatred, with aggression? How do you, since that disturbs the equanimity, since that disturbs peace, what is the ways, what is the technology of dealing with it?
Usually, I think here perhaps now here is my own interest. I usually see the consider two ways. One, a Buddhist or anyone who believer who believes in something, or even is a creator or something. There's to those person. You might have, you see, a certain different way of thinking to deal with hatred. But then you see those people who have no belief at all, then I think we should find a more effective way to deal negative emotion for such people. Because I feel that kind of people, I think, majority of the human population, I feel. So also here now these are the basis of secular ethics, without any belief, without any religion, simply to remain as a good, simply as a human being, and how to deal with this negative emotion. I personally also sometimes use these reasons or these methods. You see, they analyze what is the usefulness about these negative emotions, such as hatred. So once you develop a very strong feeling, a hatred feeling, then whether that feeling really harm on the person who you hate, that's difficult. The other person, may enjoy happily full hatred here. Doesn't hit on that. The contrary, more hit here. You lose your happiness. Eventually, you lose your appetite or your sleep. So you see, the thinking is this line. Even though you want to hit on there, you want to do something. Hatred, no use. They analyze the situation. If you see the circumstances such as you need some kind of a countermeasure, you can. Now this is a question of just or unjust. Unjust. If you see the persons is really unjustly something done or something correct, then you have the right to counter. But then from looking from that way, without hatred, you can bring some kind of a countermeasure. So that's my usually I also see that kind of thinking. And then attachment. Attachment is rather more complicated. But here also if we let this negative emotion grow, it develops limitless, and then eventually it leads some trouble, some dissatisfaction. So it is better to have some kind of limitation on these negative emotions, such as desire or attachment or pride or these things.
So you would not say to completely eliminate them. You were saying some limits.
Oh yes, of course.
Because there is
human level, we cannot say there's a possibility of elimination. Because then from for the Buddhist practitioner, then once you accept the concept of nirvana or moksha, then you accepted the possibility of elimination all these negative emotion.
Because I thought your holiness was suppressing the pleasure in hating also. There's a lot of pleasure in hating. It is not only negative. It may not harm the other person, but it is one of the cheapest pleasures to have.
Hate there. I don't know. Yes, of course. All this, the anger, these some kind of a temporary satisfaction. Yes, that usually come. But that's if you to look at from a wider perspective, you see, then you can easily see, no value.
Yeah, that is why we would say hate, but then get over hating. Don't keep on hating.
Yes, recognize something, the other community or other person, done something unjust.
Unjust and wrong.
And you see, with that recognition, some kind of disagreement or disagree or some kind of, I think, feeling of opposing. Then I think that if you go, I think, too much, then I think hatred, some kind of ill feeling. But the spirit or the feeling of opposing, I think very right. If that is something really unjust things is done. If without that kind of opposition feeling.
Mindfulness is actually distinguishing between the usage of these two terms.
Yeah.
To take proper countermeasure.
I think mental process, there may be, I think the many levels.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
But you were talking of attachment, which is even more difficult. In much of the Western views would be that that attachment is one really very much biologically based. It is needed so much for the survival.
Yes.
So that human beings are biologically programmed to attach much greater to interpersonal information. They have much greater antennas for people, etc., because it is so much needed. So, and then of course it grows. But perhaps you are talking of excessive grasping attachment.
Oh, yes,
or some,
that's right.
not attachment
so
itself to people.
I think attachment, the exact meaning, I cannot say. But like you said, desire is something want. I think there are different kind of desire. Although I think the mental level, I think there are a lot of small difference. I think a lot of differences are or I think it's helpful to make distinction. Now, for example, I think anger, there among the anger also, there can be positive anger and a negative anger. Anger, I think, comes out of concern. Out of sort of, that means, out of sort of affection. That kind of anger certainly is a positive. And that kind of anger lead, I think, the positive action.
What about anger in protecting one's rights? What would that be? Would you say that is a positive anger?
There also, I think, defense or protect one's own right, disregards other suffering, then of course that's too extreme. But you see, the other also have the right, and I also have the right, to defense or to achieve something one's own a legitimate right. Then that kind of thing, defensive feeling, it's of course is right. Then you see desire also, there can be different kind of, some are positive, some are negative. And even I think the feeling of what called ego, or the sense of self, sense of strong self. In order to develop will or determination, in order to serve other people, in order to do something, good work, you need self-confidence. For that, you need the sense of strong self. I can do. I must not abandon this work. This kind of the strong, the sense of strong self. Very much need. Here may have some kind of egoist way. The other one, think oneself is so strong, and for that, no hesitation to harm on other or to disregard others' right. Then that kind of ego, or because of the sense of strong self, is negative, too extreme.
So balance is really the answer in the Buddhism, in most things. Balance.
Yes. And I think the basics of Buddhism is a concept